Let's go with Desert first. Desert has, well, it started with, I was in a group called Robots, where we used to build giant sculptures on buildings. One of the famous ones was on the Hayward Gallery. It stayed there for a year. There's a lovely story about that. That's another story. And I was at a wedding in Sardinia, and over the table, one of the guys that was there, his name is Kimber, and he has a camp at Burning Man called Rubber Armstrong. And over a drunken chat at a dinner table at a wedding in Sardinia, we decided that we were going to go to Burning Man in 2016 and build a giant sculpture. So me and the Robots got together and decided that we would do this. So in 2016 I went to LA, drove on an amazing road trip all through Death Valley to Reno, and for a month in Reno we built a sculpture in this big giant warehouse. And we went to Burning Man Festival. So while being at Burning Man Festival, which I must add, I hated it and loved it at the same time, I thought it was a wonderful opportunity for me to take my recording gear, and I had just received a very low frequency receiver by Stephen P McGreavy. And I just took the opportunity, because I was there, just for something else. But I suppose that's where I'm kind of getting at, is that I'm always taking my recording gear with me wherever I go. And it's not always the primary reason, but it's something that always happens. So then while I was there, I constructed my own antennae, and the very fact that the Burning Man is at Black Rock City, which is in the Nevada desert, well actually it's not a desert, it's a lake bed, but it's dried out. The interference that you find in a city, being born in London, you're always getting this massive interference from the electromagnetic world, but in the middle of somewhere where there's none of that, you can get a pure, clean recording. So I wasn't going to miss that opportunity to be able to do that recording there. And then while there, something that was very interesting in the Nevada desert, is that they found arrowheads, and you can find them if you go looking, made from obsidian, and it's one of the only places in the world, I think in Turkey you can get it as well, obsidian glass, which is natural glass, I think made from volcanoes, but you can mine it there, and you can get these amazing needles from Nevada. You can buy them in some of the shops there, and people go out with a special license to go into the desert, and they can mine these obsidian needles. And they sound beautiful. Some people make some very questionable or tacky things like wind chimes and stuff like this. Anyway, but I love the sounds of them. And then one of the days, because it actually is a very inhospitable space to be in. It's like one of the worst places you could ever have a festival, because I think it's like very acid soil. It's very, so you have to neutralise it with alkaline. Like it actually is attacking your skin constantly. You can wash it with vinegar and it kind of neutralises it. But it's like one of the worst places to ever have a festival. But while there, they had the people that look after it. Actually, is a national park, and anyone can go there and camp. And there's lots of trails to go on. They do all because it's really flat. They do all those amazing high speed. How fast can a car or a bike go there? Anyway, we ended up chatting with them, and underneath the sediments of this lake, these little shrimp live, and it was just a really fascinating story. They had some on display of these tiny shrimp that lived there, and we just thought it was really fascinating. So from that composition came about through the recording of the magnetic atmosphere and the natural radio, and these beautiful glass chimes, which felt very, I don't know how to explain it, but very there. So you've got this like natural radio that's constantly around you that you can't hear. then these chimes that are very high end, and then these muffled shrimp that live under your feet. And Hannah came up with some very beautiful words, and it was inspired by them, and then sung that for that composition. So you have this kind of like really nice, like kind of layered memory of a place that was kind of special. And Nevada's a beautiful place to go to, and very inspiring. And then from that, this is where this track came from. Crummock, again, in some ways came about again because of, we were collaborating with Connie Pantera from the Seer, and we were invited to perform at the Woodland Gathering, which is in Cumbria, opposite Lake Windermere. And it's a long journey to go, and it's just a weekend. So just going there just for the weekend seems a bit extravagant. So we decided we would go and camp for 2 weeks after the festival in this amazing campsite called Sykes Campsite. And this beautiful campsite nestled between two lakes, Crummock Water and Buttermere. And there's a pub there and somewhere to get ice cream. It's one of the most idyllic and beautiful places in the world. I think we went to the Woodland Gathering Festival for 3 or 4 years in the trot, and then stayed 2 weeks at this campsite. And there's so much there in nature, and it was so profound swimming in Crummock. And again, just going there, I always take my recording equipment with me. And we had instruments because we were performing at this festival. And sometimes we'd leave the harp out, and it just made such a wonderful sound through the wind. And there's so much water travelling down from these mountains into these lakes. And we went for this wonderful walk up into one of the largest waterfalls in England. It was just a beautiful place, and it was a lovely place to just go out and record. And I felt like that piece in particular felt very, again, my interpretation of how I felt and what was going on there. I just it was just like a homage to one of the most beautiful places in the world. For me, being disencouraged to play music at school, and then from going to art school, like in my 30s, in the year 2000, was introduced to phonic and sonic arts, and there's a massive freedom in that form of unconventionality of music making, and to be able to record the very things that you find that affect you in the natural world, and be able to use them as compositions or in compositions as you would with musical instruments. I found my way of expressing myself through music was a natural thing to do, was to take field recordings and use those materials in forming sculptural elements in my work, which then you become quite fascinated with contact mics, omnidirectional mics, hydrophones, other forms of recordings, the way that you can record stuff and manipulate it to make it sound, and quite have interesting textures of like the way that you perceive or understand the space. I find the electromagnetic mics very interesting, and the VLF receivers, the way that you can find sound that's actually always there, but you're unable to hear it. These are just fascinating, quite interesting materials to be able to work with. I suppose it's always your own take and the way that you perceive and understand the world. And we're all seeing it in our own gaze and with our own ears. And sometimes some people can see something that's so different, or maybe it's so attractive to others and the way that you put things together, that it becomes a bit more than what a lot of other people are doing. But there's always inspiration out there, I suppose. You know, there are a lot of people that make work that's not well known to my ears, but it's been well known for many a time. Recently I've been introduced to Stephen Shiell and some of the work that he's been doing with bells, and I love the way, recording bells. I've been doing some work with that in the past, but I suppose at the moment I'm working on some field recordings and some work that I've been doing again in the Scilly Isles, and hopefully it's going to get picked up by somebody and will be a release. I've been going there for the last 2 years, and again that place is special in some sense that it has no cars, there's no road traffic, and it's one of the darkest skies in Britain. There's no light pollution there, there's no magnetic interference either. So again, some of the things that I'm kind of interested in, or materials that I like working with, can be recorded there really, really quite nicely. You can get some really nice, clean, kind of clean field recordings. And I've been recently really playing around with trying to do recordings that I don't really have to do too much altering, EQing and stuff. Like a bit unfiltered field recordings have become very interesting to me. A lot of people, some people do a lot of manipulation and a lot of changing of those recordings that I'm kind of interested in. The rawness or the realness, or how I can get the recording to be exactly the way that I'm hearing it in the space. I do a lot of work regarding deep listening and a lot of contemplation and meditation in spaces. And sometimes I go somewhere I feel that feels like a composition, or it's not known of, or I think it's quite well kind of researched about finding that you can imagine every sound that you're hearing where you are as a musical score, or something that has a musical quality. I find this quite fascinating, and try to kind of weave that into the work that I'm doing. I always thought it was quite fascinating that within the field recordings there's always an element of humanness, whether it's a voice or a story or an instrument being played by the environment. A lot of my compositions have those elements of it in there, and they're kind of subtle, but they're slow. They're kind of, even though the work in some ways is an observation, but it has a slight subtle tinge of like making it into something that I feel is unique in some way or form, even though that anyone could go there and record those sounds from those particular spaces. But the elements of the human touches that I add to it, I feel are kind of my appreciation of that space, and my appreciation of being able to be there at that moment in time and record and feel inspired by that very situation. There's always like a slowing down when you're recording, when you put the headphones on and you go out with the microphones, that feels like a meditation in itself, or like a study of a space, and getting to know it a little bit deeper, and a little bit more personal, a bit more intimate in some sense. And then from that, from knowing it a little bit deeper by listening, by connecting in a way that's more inward, then some inspiration from your kind of artistic practice, whether it's musicality or instrumentation or the voice or even movement. You can really feel there's that kind of connection in there, of a nice marriage of yourself wandering or moving through the environment that you find yourself in. Yeah.